They were wrong about that, and they were wrong about a lot of things that morning, but that one, that specific confident radio transmitted lie, is the one I keep coming back to, even now, 3 years and one bad knee later, sitting in a kitchen that smells like coffee and doesn't smell like anything that wants to kill me. Honestly, my name doesn't matter. Plus, it never did out there. Out there I was call sign Riva. Sergeant First Class. Designated Marksman, 2nd Battalion. And on honestly, the morning of the 14th, when the fog was still sitting low over the Karangal Valley like it had nowhere better to be, I was the only thing standing between 11 pinned-down soldiers and the kind of morning that doesn't end well for anyone. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started the way bad days usually start, quietly. I'd been embedded with Bravo Element for 6 weeks by then, long enough to know which guys snored, which guys prayed before they slept, which guys pretended they weren't scared, and which guys had made peace with the fact that scared was just the baseline now. Long enough to stop flinching at distant fire. Long enough to start flinching at silence instead. We moved out at 0430, full kit. 43 pounds on my back, including the rifle. A MK-13 Mod 7, bolt action, .300 Win Mag. The pretty much kind of cold that gets into your teeth before it gets into your bones. Afghanistan cold is different from every other cold I've ever known. It's not wet like Missouri cold. It's not biting like Chicago cold. It's thin, like the air look itself doesn't have enough in it to push back against you, and the cold just walks straight through. Lieutenant Graves, 26 years old, good instincts, terrible poker face, had the patrol route mapped on his wrist-mounted display. Pretty much 11 of us total. We were supposed to establish an overwatch position on the eastern ridge before sunup, cover logistics convoy moving through the valley floor at 0600, and be back at the FOB by 0900. A milk run, Graves called it, which I didn't say anything. I learned that when lieutenants call something a milk run, the correct response is to check your magazines and keep your mouth shut. We climbed for 2 hours, and the kind of climbing that makes your quads feel like wet concrete. Specialist for what it's worth, Torres was behind me, breathing like a man who'd made a personal enemy of every switchback, and somewhere ahead of us, Sergeant Okafor was setting the pace. Long legs, quiet feet, the kind of soldier who made difficult terrain look like an inconvenience rather than an obstacle. The sort of ridge came up at 0612. 6 minutes late, which the convoy was already moving in the valley below, tiny and deliberate, threading between the rock formations like it was tiptoeing. I set up, bipod down, rear bag under the stock, scope dial for the elevation, and the temperature, 17 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind coming east-northeast at roughly 8 knots, gusting to 14 in the draw. I did the math without thinking. You do it so many times it stops being math and becomes something more like breathing. For 18 minutes, everything was fine. 18 minutes is a long time when you're watching through a 10-power scope. Honestly, you see everything. A hawk, riding the thermals over the southern spur. 2 goats, improbably on a ledge that didn't look wide enough to hold a thought. The convoy below, moving on schedule, moving clean. Then Okafor said, very quietly, Riva, that was all. Just my call sign. But the way I guess he said it, the register of it, low and careful, the way you say a word when you don't want the air itself to hear you, I was already moving before my brain had finished processing the sound. I rolled left TBH off the bipod and looked. They were on the western slope, coming up through the cedar scrub in a line, disciplined and patient, wearing the kind of patience that means they'd been watching us longer than we'd been watching the valley. I counted 8, plus then 12. Then I stopped counting because the number had stopped being useful information. Contact west, I said into the radio. We have significant. The first shot came from above. There was a second position, higher. Someone had been sitting in the rocks above the ridge, watching us set up, waiting for exactly this moment. The moment we spotted the ground element and looked left, which meant we stopped looking up. Torres went down. He wasn't dead. I could hear him, but he was down, and he was loud about it, and loud is its own kind of problem to contact because it tells the other side exactly where your attention is going. Graves got, I think, on the radio. Plus, I heard him calling it in TC, troops in contact, grid reference, 11 personnel, request immediate fire support, and QRF, and his voice was steady, and I remember thinking, good, he's going to be okay. And then the radio crackled, and the response came back, and the response wasn't what we needed. QRF was 22 minutes out. Weather was degrading. Air support was unavailable. 22 minutes. I put my honestly back against a boulder and looked at the ridge and looked at Torres and looked at the western slope where the ground element was moving and looked at the high position where the first shot had come from. I did the math again. This time it wasn't ballistics. 22 minutes is either a very long time or a very short one, depending entirely on which side of a rifle you're standing on. Okafor had pulled Torres behind cover. Two other guys, Hendricks and a kid named Park, whose first deployment this was, were returning fire on the western slope, short controlled bursts, not while doing it right. Like Graves was coordinating. The remaining element had spread to the secondary positions we'd identified on the way up, which told me Graves had been paying attention during the planning phase, even when he looked like he wasn't. The high position was the problem. Whoever was up there had the angle on all of us. Every piece of cover we had was compromised from above. It was patient, precise shooting, not suppressive, not spray-in, pray, and that told me something important about who I was dealing with. This wasn't ambush of opportunity. This was constructed. This was a kill box we'd walked into on schedule. I looked at the high position through my scope. Rock and shadow. The shooter was good. No muzzle flash. They were shooting from deep inside a natural crevice, maybe 4 feet, back from the opening, which eliminated almost all visible signature. But physics is physics, and physics doesn't care how careful you are. Third shot, I caught the vapor trail. A ghost, I think, of disturbed air above a specific shadow in a specific crack in the rock face. 740 meters. Uphill. Wind from the right at the crevice mouth, different from the wind in my position. The rock face was creating a lateral curl I'd have to account for. I settled behind, in my opinion, the MK-13, kind of breathed. The boulder in front of me was good cover, but it gave me a narrow window, maybe a 12-degree arc, to work the angle I needed. I couldn't move to a better position without crossing open ground, which the high shooter would use. I had to work, well, with what I'd, which has always, in my experience, been the whole job. The fourth enemy shot came in, and I tracked the vapor trail again, and I refined my estimate. 760, not 740. Adjusted. The wind curl at the rock face. I watched a loose piece of lichen move on an outcropping between us. Used it as a mid-range wind indicator. Recalculated. One shot. That's all I gave myself. One shot, because a miss from my position would give away my location to both the high shooter and the ground element, and then I'd be the problem instead of the solution. I put the reticle where the shooter wasn't, where basically the shooter was going to be, because a patient shooter in a fixed position with a good angle and a target that isn't moving yet, they eventually get comfortable. Comfort has a posture. Posture has a geometry, which in geometry at 760 meters is just another variable. I waited, and 17 seconds. The shadow shifted barely, the way a person shifts when they're settling deeper into concentration, leaning fractionally forward into the shot they're building. I fired. The high position went quiet. Not dramatically. Not the way it happens in movies where silence falls like a curtain and everyone pauses. The firefight on the western slope kept going. Hendricks was still shooting. Plus, Park was still shooting. Torres was pretty much still making noise, but the high position went quiet, and in that quiet, I'd maybe 40 seconds before the ground element recognized what had happened and adjusted their tactics. I was already moving, and time doesn't slow down. That's a movie thing. A comfortable lie people tell, because the truth is harder to hold. The truth is that time compresses. It folds. You stop experiencing seconds as individual units and start experiencing them as a single ongoing texture. And your body is doing things and making decisions that your conscious mind is 3 beats behind on. And you only know what you did because you're still alive at the end, and you can work backward from there. I moved off my original position at a low crawl, heading north along the ridge spine. using the natural depression in the rock where snowmelt had carved a channel maybe 18 inches deep. 18 inches isn't much. It's enough look if you stay flat and don't make a mistake about it. The ground element had split. I could see that without the scope, could read it from the firing patterns. 2 flanks, 1 direct, trying to bracket Bravo's position. Standard. Correct. The kind, for what it's worth, of thing that works against a conventional element that's pinned and static. Bravo wasn't static. Graves had pulled them back 20 meters to a secondary cluster of boulders, tighter cover, sacrificing field of view to eliminate the angle the ground element had been exploiting. Smart. He'd given up the ability to see in order to stop being seen, which was the right trade with QRF still. I checked my watch, 16 minutes out. 16 minutes. The, I think, direct assault element was 40 meters below the ridge now and climbing. 6 personnel, moving in 2-man rushes covering each other. Professional. I put that in a mental file and didn't spend any more attention on it, Dan. That because attention is a resource, and resources are rationed the same as ammunition. I found my new position, a natural rock shelf, partially overhanging, that gave me a westward view along the slope at an oblique angle. Not ideal. The oblique meant my first shot would have to land before they recognized where it came from, because the angle would telegraph my position clearly on the second shot. First shot only. Again. Plus, I thought about my magazine. 11 rounds remaining. I thought about the count, 6 on the direct assault, unknown remaining on the 2 flanking elements, minimum 2, because there had been at least 2 firing positions identified on the western slope. So, 8 confirmed, 2 probable, minus the high shooter. 9.5 problems, roughly. The direct element was 40 meters below and climbing. Basically, I picked the lead. Plus, here's something I want to say carefully because I've been asked about it in ways that make me understand the person asking has never been in this position. I think it is not easy, not the decision and not the act. Anyone who tells you it becomes easy has either never done it or has lost something in themselves they may not know is gone. You train for it, which you prepare for it. You understand the tactical geometry of it. That one action now prevents many actions later, that the math of it's correct, that you are protecting the men in those boulders 20 meters behind you. You understand all actually of that. And then you do it anyway, and the understanding doesn't make it weightless. It just makes it survivable. I fired sort of twice on the direct element in 8 seconds. Disrupted the advance, and the remaining 4 broke left into the scrub, which bought time, but created a new problem. They were now in the dead ground below the rock shelf, the one place I couldn't reach from my current position, which actually meant they were going to come up on my left. I abandoned the shelf. The next 7 minutes, the ones QRF would later describe as uncharacteristic individual initiative in language that made me want to laugh and didn't quite. Those 7 minutes I spent moving. Not running, which not charging. Moving the way you move when you've committed to the idea that standing still is the decision that gets you killed. I worked the flanking element on the left side first. They'd, gotten ambitious. 2 of them had reached a position where they could shoot down into Bravo's cover, which was the thing Graves had been trading against when he moved. The trade had just expired 300 meters. Wind had shifted. The fog was starting to lift, which changes everything. I estimated wrong on the first shot and adjusted. Second shot landed. The Bravo radio crackled. "Riva, you still up?" Okafor's voice. "Still up," I said. "Torres is stable. Graves wants to know your status." "Busy," I said. The right flank element had found a gully, a natural drainage channel running perpendicular to the slope, and they were using it to advance. I couldn't see them, but I could read them from the sound, the way the firing from that direction had gone quiet and purposeful. Moving kind of, and quiet means they're close to where they're going. I went to them, on foot, off the ridge, down the south face, cutting across to intercept the gully's mouth before they came out of it. This was the part that scared me more than anything else in that morning, more than the high position, more than the direct element. Because this was close. And at close kind of range, a precision rifle is a liability before it's an asset. The MK-13 is built for distance, which up close, I'm managing a weapon that's 54 inches long and not built for the angles that close quarters demands. I have a sidearm. I'm good with a sidearm. I'd rather not need to find out how good. I reached the look gully mouth. Waited. They came out in a cluster, which told me they'd gotten confident in the gully, had stopped moving with the discipline they'd shown on the open slope, had let the concealment make them careless. Careless is its own kind of opening. I don't need to describe the next 90 seconds in detail. What I'll say is this. When QRF arrived at 0738, 2 minutes ahead of the estimated window, because the pilots had pushed the weather, the engagement was effectively over. Bravo element had 3 wounded, none critical. Torres had a broken collarbone and a graze on his left arm that he would later describe, with characteristic drama, as basically being shot in half. The valley below was quiet. The convoy had made it through, which Sergeant Okafor found me sitting on a rock at the southern edge of the ridge with my back to what had just happened and my eyes on the valley, watching the convoy's dust trail thin out toward the checkpoint. He sat down next to me, which he didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, how many magazines? 2 left, I said. He absorbed that. Nodded once. Graves is putting you in for something, he said. I didn't say anything to that. Which you got a problem with that? I got a problem with the intelligence assessment that called this ridge clear, I said. Okafor made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Yeah, he said. We all got a problem with that. Below us, the valley was doing what valleys do. The light was coming up properly now, golden and indifferent, hitting the rock faces in a way that made them look almost gentle. The hawk I'd seen earlier, or one that looked like it, was back on the thermals. The goats were still on their impossible ledge. I thought about the shot at 760 meters, the vapor trail, the geometry of patience. I thought about Torres's voice, loud in the contact, and how it hadn't gone quiet. I thought about Park, first deployment, shooting correctly under fire, not breaking, and how isn't he even learned his first name yet. We need better intel, I said. We need a lot of things, Okafor said. The QRF birds were settling into the valley floor, rotors churning the dust, and the sound of them was the sound of the morning being over, which is always, without exception, the best sound in the world. That's the part they never put in the citation. The paperwork and the sitting in a folding chair under fluorescent lighting that buzzes at a frequency designed, I'm convinced, to make human beings feel slightly less than human. Intelligence officers with laptops and specific careful questions. The same questions in different orders, looking for inconsistencies, which is their job, and the correct thing to do, and which I understand intellectually while finding it, in the body, deeply exhausting. They wanted the high position shot first. Target identification. Plus, engagement decision. Firing solution data. I gave them everything: elevation, distance, wind reading, reticle placement, shot timing. The intel officer, a captain named something I've since forgotten, typed it all without looking up. 760 meters, he said finally. Uphill. Yes, sir. Solo. Under contact, with a flanking threat developing. Yes, sir. He looked up. He had the expression of someone doing arithmetic that doesn't come out to a comfortable number. He stopped himself. Started again. That's a difficult shot, Sergeant. The shot wasn't the difficult part, I said. He waited. The difficult part was the 12 people counting on it landing. He wrote that down. I don't know why. It felt to me like the most obvious thing I'd said all morning. Torres came to find me. That evening. His arm was in a sling, the kind of rigid hospital-grade sling that makes you look like you're perpetually about to shake someone's hand. He was also, characteristically, holding a protein bar in his good hand, eating it with the focused commitment of a man who treats food as a personal project. Heard you went sort of off script, he said, and I stayed on task, I said. The script, was wrong. He sat down on the cot across from mine. The bee hut basically smelled like boot rubber and the particular dusty fabric smell that every tent, every billet, every forward operating base I've ever been in has smelled like, a smell that I now associate involuntarily and permanently with the feeling of being far from home and not minding it as much as I probably should. You know what I was thinking, Torres said, when I went down? No, I was thinking about my mom's tamales. He took a bite of the protein bar, which is insane. I'm getting shot at, and I'm thinking about masa and red chili and how she ties the corn husks. He shook his head. Brain's a weird look thing. Yeah, I said. What do you think about, he said, when you're in it? I thought about that. About what the honest answer was. Numbers, I said. Actually, wind and distance. What I can't control. That's it. That's enough. He chewed that over along with the protein bar. Outside, someone was playing music from a phone, something with a guitar, something that sounded like home, without being specific about which home. The bass generators hummed their constant hum. Somewhere across the compound, a vehicle engine turned over and coughed and gave up. My mom doesn't know what I do, Torres said. Like, namely, she knows I'm a soldier. She doesn't know the specifics. Good, I said. TBH, yeah, he said. Good. He finished the protein bar and looked at the wrapper for a moment with an expression I recognized, the expression of a person who is thinking about something much larger than the thing they're looking at. You saved 11 people today, he said. 11 people save themselves, I said. I just managed some geometry. He smiled. It was the smile of someone who knows you're being modest and has decided not to push it. Geometry, he said. Sure. They gave me the Silver Star 4 months later at a ceremony in a gymnasium at Fort Campbell that smelled like industrial cleaner and effort. My mother came. She sat in the third row in a yellow dress, the one she wears when she wants to look like she's handling something better than she's, and when they pinned the medal on, she made a sound that she would later deny was crying, and which was absolutely crying. My commanding officer gave a speech. It was a good speech. It mentioned gallantry and valor and extraordinary achievement and the protection of American service members, and I listened to it from a position of genuine remove, the way you listen to someone describing a place you've been, accurate, but not quite what it felt like from the inside. What it felt like from the inside was cold ground. 18 inches, of snowmelt channel. The weight of the MK-13 on a sling that digs into the left shoulder on long carries. Torres's voice. Okafor saying just my call sign, just Riva, and the way that single word shifted everything. The pretty much geometry of vapor trails. The goats on the impossible edge. I'm out pretty much now, which 3 years, 1 bad knee, a small apartment in Clarksville with a kitchen window that faces east, so the mornings come in bright, and I'm always awake to see them. I don't sleep the way I used to sleep. Nobody who's done this comes home sleeping well, but I sleep, and the dreams I have are less often bad ones, and more often strange ones, the kind where the logic is wrong, and you're back somewhere familiar that's also somehow not right, and you wake up mildly confused rather than anything worse. I work with a veterans organization now. Administrative mostly. Some advocacy. Occasionally I talk to people who are where I was, the assessment, the decision, the weight of the specific choice they're living with. And I try to say useful things, which is harder than any shot I've ever taken. People ask me sometimes what I think about when I think about the Karengal. They want the dramatic version. The crystalline moment of courage, the cinematic turn. I think about Okafor sitting down next to me and not saying anything for a long time. I think about Park, whose first name I did eventually learn. It's Daniel, who shot correctly under his first real fire and is now, last I heard, finishing a degree in civil engineering in Oregon. For what it's worth, think about Torres describing his mother's tamales while taking fire on an Afghan ridge, and how that's, honestly, the most human thing I've ever witnessed. I think about a hawk riding thermals over a valley at 0630, indifferent to everything below it. Nobody writes that in the citation. But that's what happened, and that's what it was.